Amidst the chaos of Stuart Nash losing his ministerial role, the National Party accusing the government of a cover-up. That's all in response to the Prime Minister's office admitting it knew 2 years ago about the email that saw Nash sacked. Either way, what now for Stuart Nash? To discuss, we're joined by ACT Deputy Leader Brooke van Velden and Green MP Chloe Swarbrick. Good morning to you both, and thanks for coming in. Will we see Stuart Nash back in Parliament, do you think, Chloe?
I think when it comes to him back in Parliament and him in the position of MP, that is a kind of decision that only he can make, and obviously voters come October. But I do think that this whole issue raises a far broader kind of spectre of the influence of money in our politics. To that effect, people may have seen that there were some moves in a positive direction by the government around reducing the threshold for transparency on political donations. I know the ACT Party didn't support that, but also around the Official Information Act and the efficacy of that. So some need for reform there potentially.
Why didn't you support it, Brooke?
Well, look, I think, in a democracy like ours, everybody should have the ability to make a donation to a party that shares their values.
No one's arguing that.
I don't think that's the problem here. I think what is really important here is that last week, Stuart Nash was defended by the Prime Minister for multiple mistakes. And then this week, all of a sudden, he's the fall guy for a lot of problems. And I think we have to ask the question of Jacinda Ardern when she's coming back to Parliament this week, not Stuart Nash, of what she knew was going on within her cabinet.
This is the whole, we're planting the seed that it could be a wider conspiracy, that there's something more going on. Is that what you think is going on?
Yeah, look, I think we have to ask the question, was this just Stuart Nash making one honest mistake, or is this a cover-up of what was been going on in Cabinet? Has this been a culture within Cabinet under Jacinda Ardern? And I think because we haven't seen the Prime Minister in Parliament for a while, this is the time to ask her when she's back giving her valedictory this week.
All governments are susceptible to this sort of accusation when these sorts of things get revealed, though. Do we need to tighten the rules around declaring conflicts of interest, around transparency? We've seen a lot of news about lobbyists lately. Is there some room here that we actually, after an investigation, need to tighten up the rules no matter who's in government?
Oh, look, I think it's pretty important that all New Zealanders get transparency about official information. I think we can all agree on that.
But not political donations?
No, political donations are disclosed. You'll see that the two people that were referred to in Stuart Nash's email actually did have declarable interests. And that's right. That should happen under our system. But what's really important here is if we do have the Official Information Act and we do have transparency of information, where people are willingly withholding or suppressing information that should be released, we're actually looking into that. And I don't think potentially there are maybe the right breaches for, whether it's criminal or not to withhold that sort of information. All we're really seeing is a cover-up.
I mean, there are investigations that are presently underway, I understand, by the Ombudsman and by the Cabinet Office, so these things are being looked into as they should be. But again, I think that this really comes back to, do we have a system that is effective at producing transparency and accountability?
And do we? We were promised this was going to be a very transparent government.
I don't think that we have enough of those systems in place, no. And those systems of transparency and accountability, particularly when it comes to potentially the influence of big money in politics, that reduction of the threshold from 15,000 to 5,000 for declaration of donations. I'd still say that a New Zealander who can throw $5,000 towards a political party is probably in a pretty decent position. But again, we need to make sure that we are having in place these systems of transparency, and that also involves potential changes to the Official Information Act request. But I'd say I've also heard from press gallery journalists who are a little bit wary about politicians tinkering even more with the Official Information Act, given that we are the ones who are subjected to it.
Yes.
Look, I think the Greens are focusing too much on the donors and the people who might be just wanting to show that their support for a particular
type of... That was the point of this entire...
The issue here is that the donors themselves didn't do anything wrong.
They didn't.
Stuart Nash was the one who did something wrong. Now the question is, was it just Stuart Nash, or is he the fall guy for a larger culture of cover-up under Jacinda Ardern's government?
But Moving on to the International Panel for Climate Change, 2 weeks ago, I do think this is a really important point to get in there because 2 weeks ago, and we have not had anywhere near enough mainstream time on mainstream media to talk about this, 2 weeks ago, 200 of the top scientists in the world on climate change said, effectively synthesising all of the contemporary research, that we have just 7 years to get our act in order to ensure that we stay within 1.5 degrees of warming, which is necessary for life as we know it to continue.
OK, but the problem we have is that the Climate Change Commission has recommended something on the price of carbon and Treasury has come back and said you can't. Fuel prices go up, electricity goes up, we're in a cost of living crisis, there's inflation. We can't afford to do this.
What it's really important to recognise is that we currently have an economic system that exploits both people and the planet. And to those points around the impact of price signals, particularly for lower income New Zealanders, it's really important for us to realise that it is in fact the wealthiest amongst us who contribute the most in terms of climate changing emissions, but it is the lowest income New Zealanders who are hit the hardest and the worst, as we actually saw in the flooding impacts here in Tamaki Makaurau about 2 months ago.
How do we pay for it then, Brooke?
Look, if we want to play our part on climate change, actors said it's really simple. We need to tie our carbon price with an average of our top 5 trading partners. That means our consumers and our businesses aren't worse off than other people around the globe, but we are contributing to reduce climate change emissions. But, you know, we also have to have longer-term strategy for this. That's, you know, in reforming the RMA, making it easier for people to actually invest in good green technology in New Zealand. That's not happening. But I'd also note that, you know, the Greens talk a lot about climate change, but under their government and being part of the coalition agreements, we have imported a record amount of coal into New Zealand while they've wanted to ban offshore oil and gas.
But yes, I appreciate it.
If we can talk about those longer term challenges and looking out into the future, that is precisely the point of the Zero Carbon Act, which puts us on a track to net neutrality by the year 2050, establishes the Independent Climate Change Commission and those carbon budgets. Of course, the ACT Party wants to tear that up, as well as reopen oil and gas drilling in Maui dolphin habitat.
All right,
you cannot say that you care about the environment if you're willing to do those things.
Zero carbon. It's a long way to October.
Looking forward to it.
I promise. All right. Thank you very much, though, for both of you for making the effort to come in this morning.
Cheers.
Chloe Swarbrick and Brooke van Velden.